Good evening. My name is SheyenneB, and I will be speaking to you about Amur leopards today, also known as Panthera pardus orientalis. So Amur leopards are from the order Carnivora, family Felidae, subfamily Pantherina, and genus Panthera. Their species is P. pardus and subspecies P. orientalis. These are a large feline organism, and they live within an area of eastern Russia along the border of China. And they are actually now the world's rarest big cat. Some general information about Amur leopards is that they are a very small population. They only have about 80 to 100. It is unclear due to missing information left in the wild, with a majority of their population being in captivity, such as zoos and breeding programs, especially in Europe. They can survive very cold weather because they have a much thicker coat than most of the big cats, especially in that area, as comparative to another organism such as Amur tigers. And so they can survive in colder weather, which is a good adaptation for them in their habitat, so that they will have less competition. They are solitary animals, and so because of that, they have their own territories with about 20 miles to 120 miles to themselves. So they will be spread out in that way within their habitat. And the only times they meet is during mating seasons. And once they mate and the young are born, men will leave, the males will leave, and the females will raise the cubs for 1 to 2 years until they are able to care for themselves, hunt for themselves, which then they will go off on their own and find their own territory. They're rather fast animals that can go about 75 miles per hour on average. Males usually a little faster than females. And they have a large variety of prey. However, some of the biggest ones they go after is deer, moose, wild pig, and boar. Their habitat is right here, this blue area along here, and a little over here out here. This was their historical range, no longer applicable to today's world. And so they only have this one habitat that we know of. They have not been found anywhere else. It is a temperate forest, and the northern sector is much colder, so there is less competition there for them. And it runs along the Russian-Chinese border, but a majority of the populations do live in zoos and breeding programs, especially in Europe, and the Society of London is the one that has calculated about how many they have in captivity, the 213 number we saw earlier. The status of Amur leopards is that they are critically endangered, their population is much too small, and a lot of their threats come from anthropogenic practices and involvements, such as their loss of habitat, the big three being fires, logging, and unsustainable agricultural practices, where we will end up just cutting down their trees, using those plots of land, and using them to the point that they will be dried up and usable, and you'll have to create more plots rather than using it in a more smart way and being able to use it for multiple seasons, which ends up cutting into a lot of their habitat. And we also have issues with many villages moving in towards their area and scaring them further into the habitat, which then restricts how much territory there is, causing competition within themselves. And poaching is also a big issue, as they are literally the rarest big cat in the world. You can see why some would go trophy hunting for these animals, even though they should not. And so that has been a bit of an issue. There are laws against it, and they are being enforced. However, they are not enforced very well, as is an issue between governments and working through all of that since it is along a border. They also have a very vulnerable population size, and because of that, disease is something we must look at as a very true threat, since if there is a very deadly disease that may go through their population, it could take out a majority of them due to the low genetic variability from how small their population has gotten. And because of the lower genetic variability, inbreeding is also an issue. There's not as much diverse breeding done because of the small populations and issues with sending animals from zoos to other zoos to breed, and the breeding programs being limited. Look at this poor sad guy. So currently what we have for conservation is a big part of it being camera trapping, which is a method we use to view what is happening in their habitat, gather statistical data, and find ways to better protect and conserve them. As you can see over here, the red dots are the camera placements. We use these in multiple studies throughout history, like throughout the past couple decades, especially for those trying to track the population and see if it has grown or not. But also, you can see all these black dots being villages, and those are lining and sometimes within the areas that are to be protected. And so that can become an issue because Amur leopards avoid human contact, and that will push them further in, as we talked about before. So the camera trapping is a good idea because, as you can see, it doesn't disturb them, and then it will allow them to act naturally in their habitat and not affect the population. There's also breeding programs, zoos, and wildlife reserves. Currently, there are 3 wildlife reserves that don't always interconnect. However, they do cover about 60% of their breeding grounds, which is very important, as without that, there may be no organic wild breeding. In the future, I believe that we should be introducing the captive Amur leopards to the wild as we go along so that they can become more organically integrated into the system of like their original habitat, because kept in captivity, we will be just continuously recycling the same genes, and that will lower genetic diversity, and they'll become like a glorified zoo pet rather than the wild species they are. And it will diversify the breeding this way. Without the diversification of that, is likely that they could just die out at any point from one catastrophe. We also would need to better cut out the conservation and protected areas, possibly connect them and make a larger border so that they will have more to work with, and it will have better enforcement on it if there is more agreeing to it and it's more clear cut. And for that to happen, for other things to work out, we have to have more sustainable agricultural practices. Because if we fix all this but then don't fix the agriculture, they'll just keep cutting in as close as they can, pushing them further and further into the center of their habitat, which then will lower the amount of square area for them to live in because of their territorial tendencies. And these are my references. And I did not mention before how there it is, key takeaways, thank you. And so the key takeaways for this is that human interference has taken a large toll on the Amur leopards. One such example being that between 1970 and 1983, we caused about 80% to 60% of their historical natural homes to be destroyed and unlivable for them due to conditions of humans being there, a lot of the animals dying out or moving, and things such as that. We are at a critical point in these animals' lifetime as there is such a small population, and this could be the time that it tips over to either future extinction or even sustainability and recovery on their own end. And non-disruptive techniques and their importance is that by interacting with these animals, we have caused them such harm. And if we continue to interact with them, even for research and such, it may continue to harm them. So by doing non-disruptive techniques such as the cameras, it will allow us to still study and gather information we will need, especially to protect them and conserve them, without disrupting their natural behaviors and homes. And integration will be a very big key part in the future of the recovery for them. This is my references. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice day.